Ooh, that's terrible. Let's turn you off. Mute you. Oh, my. Hello all, let's get started. I just realized I wore a light green shirt today, which is not good because it's causing some troubles with the background. So I'll have to make a mental note of don't wear green shirts, which is pretty funny because I actually had a conversation with some people about, the green screen and avoiding certain colors, and here I am doing it. Granted, it's a mint shirt, but I didn't think it'd have any effect on this. So today we are going to work on the contact application and try to build out the business slash management slash logic layer, especially the essentially the UIs that are going to, or the piece that the UIs are going to call to get data around the contacts or save them, update them, etc. So let's go back to our project, which is now in Writer. I started out in code, but getting some new projects added and remembering all the text that is required made it a little bit more challenging. So let's go back to just take a quick look at our domain. We have one contact object, has a primary key, which is the contact, first name, middle name, last name, email, birthday, address, image URL, addresses, and phone numbers. And then we have a little helper function to get the full name. That's pretty much the main object. There are some supporting ones like address, address type, phone, and phone type. So let's go and turn this into a solution. And we don't have a solution, so we are going to create a solution. So let's unload the projects. And then click add. I'm just going to close this and start off with a new instance of Writer. Yes, exit. Actually, let's just do file new solution. That should work. File new. And then let's choose empty solution and call it contacts. And let's move it off to our project directory that already exists because we have certain projects in there. See projects, contacts, and then source. Click open. I don't want to create directory for the solution. Hit create. I have a contact solution with no projects, so let's add an existing project, which is the domain project. And now we're in as if we were in Visual Studio and or Writer. We have a solution with one or more projects to it. Right now we have the contacts.domain. So we're going to go add another one. Your naming might vary. Every place seems to do it slightly different. So I'm going to call mine logic. Some places call it business layer. Some people call it data layer. Some people call it management layer. It just varies. Actually, I think I'll just call my business layer to be fancy. So actually, let's call it logic. So I'm going to do, I tend to name mine with the fully qualified name. Makes it easier when you're looking at files and namespaces, etc. Project directory, .NET Standard 2.1. And let's go and create. So in about a second or two, we should have a new empty folder with the typical class 1. We'll rename that class 1 to get started. Essentially, this class will allow us to have access to and from our logic layers. So let's start off with that. I'm going to rename this using a shortcut, which is the command key on the Mac, RR. I think it's Control RR on Windows. And I'm going to call this Contact Manager. You'll notice that JetBrains is providing some options. Since it's already class, it's assuming you want to add Contact Manager to it, but I'm just going to do it like that. I also have the option to rename files to reflect this. It's default, and you should do that. And then you can search in comments and string literals. This typically I always do, but since this is the only case this class is used, I'm not going to bother with. Click next. Second or so, you should be good to go and your contacts are there. So what do we do with this contact manager? Essentially, we want the ability to add contacts, delete contacts, search for contacts, etc. So let's go and create the basic. We have the public class contact manager, and let's do the first thing. So we're going to create an instance, a public method, which means that it's exposed to anyone that has access to this class. We're going to want to return a contact. Now you notice the contact is red. It's red for a reason. It's red because it doesn't know what a contact is. Excuse the dog barking in the background. It doesn't know what the contact is, so we're going to have to go and add that. But good thing is Writer provides a quick shortcut to it. We're going to call this get contact, and then typically you give it the parameter that you want. So in this particular case, contact ID is our primary field, which means it's a unique identifier. Just like every person has some kind of identifier to them. In the US, you have a social security number, which is typically supposed to be unique. You have an employee ID at work that's usually unique, something that identifies you. In this particular case, contact ID identifies us. And then for now, we are going to throw a new, what's called not implemented exception. This means we wrote the code, but we haven't really built it out. So if anyone uses this, they're going to get a message that says, hey, this is not implemented yet. So let's take care of the red squiggly or the red text here. You'll notice that within Writer, we have the contact manager.cs, which is the file we're currently in, that has a red squiggly line on it. You can also see it in its Solution Explorer. as well as the contact solution. So it's telling us here that the contact solution has 2 projects in it, and one of them has an error. And then we look at the contacts.logic, shows us that there is an error, and then the contact manager has an error. So I come to this error, I get a little red light bulb, and it's telling me that it has a suggestion for me to reference the contacts.domain and use contacts.domain.contact, which is exactly what we want to do. So I can press the command key and hit return, and that's not the right shortcut. It is control return, I believe. And that gives me the ability to reference. These are called refactorings depending on the framework you're using. This particular one tells me that I'm going to reference contacts.domain and use contacts.domain.contact, or I can create a new type, create a nested type, create parameters, etc. This is a cool feature that I like, the ability to search for it. So if you have some commonly used packages, which we'll probably cover in the next stream, it can automatically find it for you. So I'm going to do reference project, and now you see it's nice and light green in my particular case. Actually, this is the color of my shirt, believe it or not. You'll notice we have a using up here, and if I check on dependencies for the logic, there's a dependency on .NET Standard 2.1. Don't worry about the imports. If we look at the different assemblies, we can see that there are some implicit ones. We're not going to go in great details. That's essentially system and all the other ones like that. But we do have a reference to projects. We can also see that if we edit the project file. You can't do it from this view easily. If you're in the file view, you just click on it, it shows it. If you do edit and edit, or on the Mac, the command key and down arrow, you'll see it. There is a new item group added to the project that essentially does this. You can also do it in the command line by using the .NET tool and do .NET add package and then the fully qualified path to this package. Tried that yesterday, and I'm really not good at that command line for it. I just got to keep trying it and getting it better. So now we have that. Let's see what else we'd want to do. We can do a public, and then let's return a list of contact. We want to return all the contacts. So let's do get contacts and then no parameters. This just means return all them. You notice immediately we get import this because it knows that this should be system.collections.generic.list. So I do alt return and automatically import that. It's smart enough to say, oh, I know this is here, I can do that. So it was one less set of things I had to do. I'd have to go back up to the beginning of the project, do using system.collections.generic, which is on line 2. I just did the option and return. For this one, we're going to do a whole throw, new, not implemented. And then let's add a different find, which didn't think about before. Let's do a public list of contact, get contacts, and then this one we are going to pass in the first name and last name. This will get us any contact with that first name and last name. And the reason why this returns a list is because in theory you might have more than one contact with the same name, but like different cities and stuff. We're probably not going to do that in real life or in our examples, but just to show you others. Now we have that. Now we have 3 basic ways to retrieve contacts. Let's find a way to save contacts. So I am going to do another public method and then give this one an int for now. Actually, I'm going to give it a void for now, which means we're not going to return anything. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then save contact. Now, depending on the kind of the organization you're in, this method's signature looks very different. Some places will have you pass in the object. So something to the extent of this, meaning you have to give me the object and I'll go and save it. Other places do something like this: public void save contact, and then do string first name, string last name, string middle name, and then so on and so forth for each of the properties. Unfortunately, or fortunately enough, that's a lot of coding to type. It's also problematic in a couple of different ways, or at least prone to errors. Common error is forgetting to add something. So let's say later on we decide in our contact manager that we want a different property called, let's say preferred name. We have to go here and add that preferred name to it. Then where do we add it? Do we add it to the end? Do we add it right after this? And so on. We're probably, for ease of use, not going to add that in here. Also, for saving, different places have different kind of things around, different types of policies around how to handle return types for saving. Some places will do a Boolean and return back whether or not it saved or not. So true if it saved, false if it didn't. Some places will return back the primary identifier, which means anything non-zero in this particular case for an int is a successful save. And some places will return the working contact back to you, especially in case there's any other fields that are there. For simplicity's sake, right now we are going to create it as an int and then save it. Or we'll say send back the ID. Argument null, exception. Oops, wrong exception. It's going ahead of the script. Sorry, we got to do a not implemented exception. Now that we have that done, we have our basic save. Let's go and take a look at the delete. We're going to do a public bool in this case for delete contact. Now again, your school of thought and or the organization you're working from might have different standards. I'm going to use both because these are super common in either case. One is to delete by the primary key, and then the other is to delete by the actual object. Because in most cases, the object is already created and you just want to remove it. So let's go here. This is red right now because I have it declared to return a value and I'm not returning anything. So if I do throw new, for this one I really don't have to do a throw new. I can just, because you don't want the logic duplicated for both, I know, again, this is the business layer, so this is where all the intelligence is. I know that I want the contact ID to be primary key, so I am just going to say return the delete contact and then pass in the contact ID. And why are you not showing up? Delete contact. What did I miss? Public boolean delete contact. Well, IntelliSense is not working. Why are you giving me that's not there? Cannot resolve symbol, public bool, delete contact, delete contact. Let's see what the IntelliSense is telling me. No, it should be right. Oh, I have a semicolon here. There it goes. So this is saying go back and take the contact and go and delete it using this method. You'll see right here, it's actually highlighted now that there is one usage that we see, or one usage. If I click on it, it'll tell me where the usage is. On line 36, it's being called in this particular class. That's great. However, there is a bug within this particular method. If a user was to do something like delete contact null or pass in an object that's null, the method at line 36 would break because we would get the very infamous and very painful object not set to an instance of a variable. So let's do some defensive programming and make sure that this works, or that we avoid that error. So you do that with something that I like to call, and most of the industry calls, not Dave, but data or argument validation. So you did the double / which indicates this is a comment. So typically this is at the very beginning of a method where you double check all the inputs that are coming in to make sure they are safe and meet the rules for your application. In this particular case, we want to make sure that the contact is not null. So I'm going to do an if statement to say if contact equals null, then what do I want to do? So I hinted to it before, there is something called an argument exception, or argument null exception. You also notice that we have some great behind the scenes compiling going on by writers saying that, hey, there is a possible system.null reference exception, which is that object not set to an instance of a variable that I was telling you about before. This we're going to proof our application to make sure that doesn't happen. So now if we get a contact where the value is null coming in, we are going to throw a new argument null exception. Now with the argument null exception, you'll see that there are 4 different overrides for it. The one is blank, which means nothing, but the 2 that are most common are the message and exception, which is the second one on this list. or the one I use a lot, is the fourth override, which asks for a parameter name and a string method. So you can type in the name contact, and you see here Writer and Visual Studio 2 is smart enough to say, hey, you want to do the contact, so I'm just going to hit enter. Now I also get a green squiggly line because there's an even better way of doing this method. So if I do my option enter, I'll see some helpers that say, hey, use the name of expression. So I do that. Now I have different syntax that says name of contact. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Let's say someone comes along and says, well, I don't like the word contact for it. I want you to use the word person. So you're going to come through and change that. In a lot of cases, you're going to do this and do person, do this and do person. There's an actually easier way to do that. But even that, what happens with this text if you don't change it and you had the word contact in quotes? You have a good chance of missing it. But now if I want to change this, I go back to my rename and choose person, and it's renamed in all 4 spots without me having to do anything. So I'm going to go back to be consistent and call it contact. So a brief summary of this: we have a new delete contact, which takes a domain object called contact in. We happen to name it contact. We'll be saying that word a lot. Or more so I will, not necessarily we. We're checking to make sure it's not null. In this case, if it's null, we're throwing an exception back. And then we are, if it's good, meaning it's not null, we're calling up to this delete function to actually do it. I said the comment overload that I use is the second one, which gives you the parameter name and then the message. You'll notice we get IntelliSense that pops up and tells you, well, right now it looks like you are doing the string method comma exception argument. So it tells you what the help text is for that. In this case, the method is initializing a new instance of argument null exception, blah, blah, blah. And right now it's expecting the inner exception, which is that. But I'm not going to use that one. I am going to use the other one. So if I hit, I could hit the down arrow, but I know what the text is. And I don't remember what the shortcut is to move down. As soon as I start putting in the quotes, which tells it I want to use the string one, it tells me what I am or what I'm doing, a message that describes the error. So I'm going to say the contact field, or actually the contact parameter, is required. If I want to get away from the contact, the word contact in here, and use name of, I can do that. I typically don't do that because this text is what is seen by the engineer as they're working on other pieces, and in some cases that could be bubbled up 2 or 3 layers in the application. So this keeps us from using any secret words in there. Now we have the data validation. Let's do that in some of the others. So we're going to want to do that in this save. So I'm going to still keep in the throw new exceptions in there and work on some of the data validation in that. So let's do the data validation, not day validation. And then we're going to start off with the null checks because we're going to add in some additional ones for this. Now, instead of going through every single one with you, since you've already seen it, I'm going to copy and paste some of the existing ones. So here everything else is pretty similar to what we just saw. We're going to throw a new argument null exception if context is null, or if contact.firstname is null, or empty, last name, and email address. Those are the only fields that we require here. The middle name is optional. Birthday is not nullable, so it's going to come in at some point. The anniversary is nullable, and the image URL we're not going to care about for now. So how do we handle the birthday to make sure it's actually a really valid birthday? So let's take a look at that one. So let's do business rule validation. Sounds really fancy and really important. With this one, what we're going to do is take a couple of quick tests around it. So let's do if contact.birthday is greater than datetime.now, we should have a problem. You shouldn't be born in the future if you're storing someone in this app, at least not yet. So I'm going to do a throw. Ooh, I keep hitting a keyboard shortcut that I'm not familiar with. Throw new argument. In this particular case, we're going to do an argument out of range exception. Sounds fancier. This just gives a more specific error for what's happening. You'll notice there's a couple of different options on this one. You actually have the actual value that was passed in addition to a message. So we can tell the caller of the application or the caller of this contact manager saying, hey, for the parameter birthday, you pass us in 5, or let's say, what's today, May 5th, 2020. You passed in June 5th, 2020. So let's use that one. So I'm going to do name of. And you notice it already saw the contact in there because that's the primary parameter. And then birthday. And then I'm going to do contact.birthday. And then the birthday cannot be in the future. Or spell future right. Let's get that better. And then hit the semicolon so it gets on the right line. We got a little extra space there. And in a future stream, we're going to go and look through how we actually go back and validate that this rule is working before we go and test it. Let's go and add some business rules for the contact property of anniversary. So here, if contact.anniversary is greater than datetime.now, we'll throw the same type of exception. Throw new argument out of range exception. Name of contact.anniversary. Contact.anniversary, comma, the anniversary cannot be in the future. Now this is fine and dandy, but if you remember in our contact app, in our contact model, the anniversary is nullable. That's what this question mark means? That means I can set it with nothing. So when we go and do a save, this validation could potentially break the application, meaning that contact anniversary is null. We'll get a nullable exception here. There's two ways to fix this. The first way is to use the new Elvis operator, which is this, that will check to see, actually no, not that field. We'd have to do it on here. The way I like to fix it, which is a little bit clearer, is contact.anniversary.hasValue, which means that there's something in there and it's not null. And then we end it and it with this. So this says if there is a value and the anniversary is this, fail it. Otherwise, we don't want to test it. And then the other exception, or the other thing we want to add, is just a simple check to make sure our anniversary is not greater than our birthday, or less than our birthday, which means we can't be married before we're born. So that's what this one does. And to be consistent with the others, I am going to add contact.anniversary. So now we added some basic validation that we can do on the objects. Now it's actually a lot of code here, between 27 and 65, but at least it kind of protects us from getting bad data. And the last thing you want to do is act on bad data or save bad data to your data store or repository. So what other validations can we do? We can probably add some additional null checks to here. And I believe I have those already typed out, so we don't have to worry about it. So let's paste this here. And it's the same that we saw before. Last name and first name are validated, meaning you have to pass us in something. We'll look at more generic methods way out in the in another stream for ways to make this a little bit more easier to search for different options. Right now, this is our basic contact manager. So if I collapse everything just for readability, and I know there's a shortcut for it, but I don't know what it is. F9. Thank you. That will call this, and I think that is Control 9. Nope. Option 9. Nope. Nope. Command 9. Control Shift 9. Keyboard shortcuts are a little bit different on the Mac, so I'm just going to do that now until I figure it out. So we have a get contact method, a get contacts first name, last name, the ability to save contacts, the ability to delete contacts, and another option to delete contacts. You also notice that all these are in a slightly grayish color. This is Writer's way of telling us that they're never used. So if I hover over it, you'll see class contact manager is never used, whereas this one that actually has one usage is, in my case, a mintish green color. Your color may vary depending on your setup. So in our next stream, we are going to take a look at how we actually implement the logic for this. So what do we do to actually retrieve a contact, save a contact, and delete contacts. So we're going to introduce a database and then tie into a database. So we'll probably start off with entity framework and then connect to a SQLite database, which is an easy and still free way to connect to databases while you're learning or just playing around. Hey Mike, how you doing? Thanks for joining. Just noticed I'm just about to wrap up. I didn't see you join in. Hopefully you have some great feedback for me. That being said, we are just about done with this. If you want to follow along with this, I will update this GitHub repo, which is github.com/JoeG And then if you click on the outlined file, you'll see the step-by-step guide as to what we did. The first two streams were introducing the IDEs. Next string was building out the contacts module, and now we're going to fill out something here. So once the video is done uploading and all the encoding is done, I'll put that here with the commit so you can follow along. That being said, I am going to end it. Please follow me on social media, which are the links that will pop up in a minute.